not the reality in a lot of countries. And I want to give you only one example. And this example is India. You can see that in India is living 18% of the worldwide population, but India has access or has available the 8% of the arable land, not the 18% as the population. And more important, India have access to the 4% of the worldwide water. Water that it is coming on the monsoon season, everything together in a few days, and very difficult to manage in order to be used in the best way for the production of food. That makes that with the actual tools of growing the main crops, it's very difficult to produce the food that all Indian population needs. And this is something that it's happening in other countries. If we take all the worldwide together, all the planet together, the reality is that there is not enough land in order to increase the production of food, all that we need to feed that population. So the question is that we need to develop new technologies in order to be able to increase the crop production. We need to almost produce close to 100% of kilograms of corn, of rice, of canola, of soybean using the same land. So we need to be able to produce double of production using the same land. So we have a key question here, and it's if we are going to be able to produce all the food that we need to feed the worldwide population, and to do that in a sustainable way in order to have the less impact possible to the planet. The answer is yes. Yes, we can do that. But for that, we need again to use the biotechnology as our ancestors did on the Neolithic times. Agriculture is one of the key economical sectors for most of the countries. And this is a social, has a very social impact as well. In the different countries, we have different kind of consumptions. We like eating different things. We like cooking in a different way. But from economical point of view, it has a very big impact. The agricultural sector on the 60s and 80s, around 15 years before, it went through what is called the Green Revolution, that mainly happened, that improved significantly the production. In that moment, with the tools that they have, that the growers had in that moment, and the developers developed in the 60s and 80s, the production of crops mainly doubled. So more or less what we are trying to do now, okay? That increase of production that was very, very big, almost 100% of the normal productions before, were driving mainly because of the development of new production, more productive seeds, and especially because of the development of the inputs, what we call inputs, that are pesticides, fertilizers, and herbicides. So yes, we were able to double the production of the crops, but the sustainability was not achieved. And today we know that the use of those products had a big impact on the environment. Look, what you can see on the slide is the record of production of two main crops for the human consumption, corn and rice. The maximum production level of corn was happening in 2016 in US with 35 metric tons per hectare. And the maximum production of rice, it was happening in India in 2012 with 22.4 metric tons per hectare. But the reality is that the average production of those two crops is too much lower to the maximum achieved in 1 year in one place. So usually the average of production of corn is 5.8 metric tons per hectare, and the average production of rice is around 4.5 metric tons per hectare. So we are losing around 65% of the crop. We are not able to produce, or we are losing 65% of the crop. Remember that we were telling that we need to increase 100% of the crop production, and we are already losing 75% of the production every year. The question is why we are losing that on the field. What's happening on the field? And on the field, what is happening is the environment. Look, in this graph, you can see, for example, in the case of the corn, the total loss is close to 76%. 66% of the loss of the production of crop is happening because of what we call abiotic stresses, okay? Abiotic losses. Abiotic stresses are those related to the environment. High temperature, a lot of water, very few water, cold, or all these kind of climatic conditions that can kill the crops. And the other 10%, it's lost because of what we call biotic stresses that are mainly pests, viruses, bacteria, nematodes, or any other kind of pest that infects and kill the plant. So we can achieve 75 of the target need, only reducing the loss of the abiotic and the loss because of the biotic stresses. And moreover, we can work on trying to improve those record yields in order to produce more, to reduce the loss, and in that sense, to achieve the objective of producing 100% more crops for the human food. So to the question, can we have enough food for all the population? The answer clearly is yes, but for that we need the biotechnology. Let's see how we have arrived to that point from biotechnological point of view and from plant development point of view. And let's see what it will come in the future. And everything started, as I mentioned before, with the domestication, okay? And the most typical and clear example is the domestication of the corn, the development of the corn. The origin of the corn is a very small wheat that it is called teosinte. You can see in comparison with a coin that it is much more smaller than the corn plant. Teosinte was used on the pre-Columbian cultures because the small grains of the small ears, they were sweet. So they used to extract the sweetness. When the domestication started, it was based on using some of those kernels for seeding on the next year, okay? From one season to another. Years and years and years, selecting and using those seeds for the next seeding season. The question is that sometimes on the crop, on the plants of teosinte, it used to appear a plant with a bigger kernels or with a bigger ear, and usually that was the one that the growers used to take for seeding the next year because they were the best ones, visually speaking, okay? So they were selecting from year to year the best kernels, the best grains, and at the end of the day, the best plant for the next generations. And in a process of hundreds of years, that improvement was happening until the development of the corn as we know today. That you can see that it is a very big ear with a lot of kernels, and kernels with a lot of content of sugar and bigger, much bigger than the teosinte. What it was happening, but of course they didn't know, is that there were happening changes on the DNA of the teosinte, changes that were translated on better plants. with bigger kernels, with bigger ears. And they were selecting the changes on the DNA. Again, that was a process of hundreds of years of selection and reservation for the next year, selection and seeding, selection and seeding. Today, we know that from DNA perspective, the difference between the Jakiunde and the corn are very low. So changes that were happening after hundreds of years, today we can do on no more than 6 months. One of the critical milestones for the improvement of the plant varieties happens when Gregor Mendel postulates the inheritance laws. As all of you know, he was crossing peas with different color, yellow or green, and with different peels. He was crossing the peels and was analyzing the next generation. And what he realized is that always the same percentage of the individuals of the next generation were having the main characteristics of the parental ones, okay, of the plants that were giving the key characteristics. So for the first time, the growers were able to predict the percentage of plants of interest that they were going to obtain when crossing parentals with the characteristics of interest. And that was very important because that is the base of the classical breeding, okay? Well, usually, as I mentioned, the growers used to take two parental plants with two independent characteristics of interest, in this case, a small plant and another parental, a plant with a very big with a very big corn, because they will know that a percentage of the inheritance, they will have the two characteristics together. So they could predict the number of plants, of new plants, that they will have the same characteristics. But here they had a challenge still not achieved. And that challenge was related to the changes on the plant. Still, the changes of the DNA that were responsible of those characteristics of interest, size of the plant, size of the ear, size of the kernel, still were happening randomly without any control and naturally occurring, okay? So still the growers couldn't look for or push for specific characteristics of interest. They need to wait to happen randomly on the nature. That changes significantly when in 1953 the DNA structure was discovered. As you know, the DNA is the molecule that contains all the information for the creation for the creation of an organism. In that moment, those researchers, they do not only describe the structure of the DNA, they also describe how the DNA is organized. They postulate that the minimal information that it is available on the DNA is the gene. It's a package of information that they call gene, and that gene is the minimal information for the synthesis of a protein. And a protein or multiple proteins are the responsible of a characteristic. So for the first time, it was possible to associate one characteristic of interest, level of sugar, level of amylose, amylopectin, size of the kernel, size of the plant, to the genes. So there was a corresponding between the genes and with that information, we understood that there was a corresponding between the genes and the final characteristics. I wanted to mention that in 1962, Crick, Watson, and Wilkins, they obtained the Nobel Prize because of this discovery. But Rosalind Franklin, the one that describes the chemical structure of the chemical structure of the DNA, was not aware. So It was not the only moment that the women went out of the award of the Nobel Prize. Okay, thanks to the discovery of the DNA, for the first time, as I mentioned, it was possible to associate a gene to a characteristic. So thanks to the DNA, the breeding, the classical breeding, goes a step forward and start working with molecular markers. And this is the base of the marker-assisted breeding. So on the conventional bracт crossing, as you can see on the slide, the growers needs to cross. They will know that there will be a percentage of plants with the characteristics of interest. But based on the marker-assisted breeding, they could analyze the seeds before growing, and they could select the seeds having the characteristics of interest based on the DNA information. Okay, because basically what the marker-assisted breeding makes is to assign like an DNA identification to each one of the seeds and each one of the genes. So thanks to that, the process was completely accelerated. There was another important point when the DNA molecule is discovered and is understood the structure. We understood also how that structure can change. And for the first time, the growers and the companies working on seed development and new varieties development could obligate to the DNA to change, could push changes on the DNA that will generate in a more accelerated process new characteristics of interest regarding to the quality, regarding to the color, regarding to the sweetness, to the size, to the production, or whatever. Why? Because they understood how to change the molecule of the DNA molecule. And for that, two main technologies has been used. Okay. Basically, what has been done historically since the DNA molecule is described is to use the mutagenesis using two main technologies, radiation or chemical mutagenesis, in order to do random change on the DNA that at the end of the day could be translated on a characteristic of interest. All of us, we know that the radiation mutates. That's why we need to protect ourselves when we are in the sun in the summer. But also the chemical compounds also can cut and can modify the DNA. It sounds the word sounds a little bit scary, but we need to know that close to 95% of all the vegetables, fruits, and other kind of crops that we are consuming in our houses, they has been produced and developed using mutagenesis and marker-assisted breeding for the development. And this is not risky. It can sound scary because we are hearing a lot of things on the media, but the reality is that most of our products has been developed in that way. And here you have some examples how the ancestral watermelon looks like. Impossible to eat that. Very big seeds, very white without sugar content, and how the watermelon is today. How the bananas are today and how they were on the ancestral way. And all the development and how we arrived to the products that we know today has been using domestication, breeding, mutagenesis, and marker-assisted breeding. But the technology didn't stop here. As I mentioned, this is how I would say 95% of the products has been developed, but the technology continued developing. Okay. The next step or the next main development was the genetically modified organisms. Okay, or not well used the name, but usually named as transgenic crops. The transgenic technology allows to in a single gene, not randomly like in the mutagenesis, take a single gene to overexpress, increase the number of copies of the gene responsible of a characteristic. Okay, that can come from the own plant, and you are not transferring genetic material from one organism to other, or the genetic material can come from other organisms, like in the case of the corn. And this is a technology that it is more directed technology than the mutagenesis. This is a technology that is safer than the mutagenesis, but this is a technology that was not very well recognized in general by the general public. A lot of people thought that we are consuming a lot of transgenics in our life. The reality is that there are only 8 crops genetically improved with this technology and commercialized. In Europe, they can be only used for animal feed, although we are importing some of the products from other countries. And this is a technology that it's very, very difficult to commercialize, even if it is safe and even if it is very specific. Another technology that has come to the table, it came to a table years ago through CFNs and talents, is the gene editing. There are different technologies of gene editing that has been used. Gene editing, it's in each one of the technologies, we go a step forward on safety, we go a step forward on specificity, and on a speed of development. Okay. In the case of gene editing, where they are different technologies, one of the most recognized or most known on the last years is what we call Crispr. It's basically what allows us to do a single base modification of the DNA. So it's not random mutagenesis that is happening with the radiation or with the chemical compounds, but it's just to take one base of the DNA and modify only that one. So very specific. It's a naturally occurring system to change the DNA for different effects on the plants and on the microorganisms mainly, and it was discovered here in Spain. So this is again a technology that has a lot of applications on health, but a lot of applications on agriculture as well. On health, it's going to be used earlier than on agriculture, but again, it's a safer, more specific, and very useful tool. Regarding to my comment to the Nobel Prize before, I wanted also to mention that the father of the CRISPR system, of the CRISPR-Cas, is called Francis Mojica. He's Spanish. He works on the University of Alicante, worldwide recognized as the father of the CRISPR, but and several times on the last years nominated for the Nobel Prize. I have to say that unfortunately, finally last year, the Nobel Prize awarded the CRISPR-Cas system, but not to Francis Mojica. It awarded to Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna because of the use of that technology for different applications. Okay, as you can see, the food that we have on our fridges, the fruit, the vegetables that we are consuming are produced using a lot of different tools. Today, the agriculture has a very big toolbox of biotechnological tools and non-biotechnological tools, and more will come in the future in order to achieve the objectives that we have of the production of food for the growing population, where we have the plant breeding technologies, as we have seen, the classical plant breeding technologies and market-assisted breeding. We have the transgenics and GMOs. We have the new breeding techniques like gene editing. We have alternatives to the classical fertilizers or pesticides, like new molecules or new microorganisms that are coming from the nature, that are the biofertilizers, the biostimulants, and the biopesticides. We have other tools like plant growing promoters or plant protection products. And still we have some chemical fertilizers that are very useful, that are being used in more sustainable way, and that they are being used in more safety way than on the Green Revolution period. And there is another piece on the toolbox, there is another tool that is very, very relevant from a sustainable point of view, that it is the precision agriculture, the drones, the big data, the GPS, because those kind of technologies allows to the grower to put the fertilizer or to use the best seeds depending on the conditions, on the agroclimatic conditions and the soil conditions in a small areas. So I gave you an example. The growers will not need to fertilize all the land or all the crops, so just those areas that really needs the fertilizer. They won't need to use watering in all the crop, but only in those specific areas where the crop needs the water. And that makes those tools, and that makes the agriculture more and more sustainable. Those tools will allow to use in more efficient way the land, the water, the chemical inputs. They are allowing also to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, to improve significantly the quality of the crops as well. And in some cases, those technologies can be used also to clean up the contaminated soils. When oil is sprayed on the seed or is sprayed on the land, it's possible to use, for example, transgenic plants that are able to capture that oil or that molecules that are contaminating the soils. I wanted to finish the talk telling you something that it used to be mentioned by José Miguel Mulet, that you can follow on Twitter, on Instagram and LinkedIn, because he always said that we need to be clear and we need to know that there is more technology in a tomato than in an iPhone. Thank you very much. Please, if you have any question or any comment, I will be happy to answer. Please write on the questions and answers box. Okay, anybody has any question? I'm sure that all of you have your own opinion about the transgenics, about the fertilizers, about the sustainability. So I'm sure that someone wanted to do any question on that. Come on, really? Any discussion on the transgenics almost? What do you think about the ecological production of the products? Do you know the difference between the ecological and the traditional production of fruits, for example? You can write the question in Spanish if you feel more comfortable. Okay, there is a question from Malta Roldan. So the question is, so in order to have enough food in the future, we need to use transgenics as new crops or methods of cultivation? We need to use transgenics among others, not only transgenics, and not only one method of cultivation. But it's true that transgenics is a tool that can be very useful for some areas. For example, there are transgenic plants that allows to put plants on areas where there is very low water, or that it is very cold and usually do not grow any other kind of crops. So that will allow also to improve the areas of production. Transgenics are not the unique tool, are not the best tool between the other ones. It's just another tool that can be very, very useful. And I think that it might be used as well. Okay, there is a comment. Thanks for the detailed explanation. I have learned things that I didn't know before. Thank you so much. That was the main objective. I didn't speak about ecological production, but perhaps if there is any question about that, I can give you a quick view of what it means from a production point of view. Let me do a question, see if somebody wanted to answer. How do you think that is produced an ecological fruit? Do you think that it is using any kind of inputs or fertilizer or something similar? You can put your comments in Spanish, in Basque, and in English, as you prefer. Because a lot of people think that the ecological products didn't have any kind of treatment. It's just production like our grandfathers used to do on their small lands in the village. Okay, the reality is that do you think that with the advance on the technology of the production of the food that we consume every day can be more harmful for our health? Look, the technologies that are being used for the development of the products are more and more safe. And now that we have more knowledge about the impact of the food in our health, more and more the new production ways, the new foods that are going to be developed and are under development are going to have a better impact in our health. Moreover, there are other technologies that still are under development, like, for example, the use of foods for vaccination, for example, where it's possible on tomatoes to put antigens or to put the active ingredients in order to do an easier and quicker vaccination of the population. So the new food is going to have a better impact in our health. The new technologies will allow us to use the food for other applications, not only nutrition, that are going to have a very good impact as well in our health. Okay. People say that in the future, the world won't be hungry with that type of products. Are you agree? Do you think that is the solution? Okay, you mentioned you are asking if we are going to have enough food and enough kind of these products for all the population. The answer is yes. We can produce all the food that we need for the population. We have the land to produce, we have the tools to increase the production. The question now is why not all the population is getting enough nutrition level, is having access to all the food. And here there are two questions. As I mentioned before, is the geographical differences from agroclimatic conditions point of view, access to seeds, access to inputs, and so on. But the other thing are the political questions, okay? Political questions about, at very different levels, about the approval of new technologies to be used, about the import-export questions, economical reasons as well, about which are the countries that have perhaps less access to land, but on the other hand, more access to the food, and vice versa. So yes, it's possible. It's true that it's possible to produce enough food, and we are producing enough food not to have hungers on the world. But it's more a management question about access to the raw materials, political questions, and economical questions. And all of us, we know that they are there, but this year with this pandemic situation, we are feeling more at worldwide level. So to your question, yes, there won't be hungry people in the world, because they should have access to the food. Okay, apart from the use of fertilizer, is the modification of the DNA of the vegetables we eat beneficial or harmful to our health? I will say that it doesn't have impact. It's not better or it's not worse. When a new seed is developed based on DNA modification, and we can include there, for example, mutagenesis, transgenics, or gene editing, the process since the product is developed till the product arrives to our fridge and to our hands and to the retailers, it's a very long and safety process. You need to do the change. You need to demonstrate that the change on the DNA, it's only changing the characteristic that you want. For example, if a company wanted to develop a tomato that it is more sweet with more sugar content, they can do the change on the DNA to produce more sugar in the tomato. They have to demonstrate that this is happening, but there is not happening any other change on the tomato, anything else, just the sugar content. But before going to the field, they need to demonstrate that there is not toxic consequences for the people, for the other plants, for the insects. So they need to demonstrate that the product is safe, not only for human health, but also for the environment. After that, they need to do a lot of field testing. They need to do a lot of analysis until the obtention of the final approval for the commercialization of the seed of the new product, okay? So before putting a new tomato in the field, there are a lot of years, not only of development, but also of demonstration that it has not a negative impact or any kind of impact. That's why, in my opinion, those changes of the DNA today, they are not having any better or worse impact on the health. But again, as I mentioned before, there are some research projects on health between health and agricultural research groups in order to develop new products that can have more positive impact on the health, okay? Increasing the antioxidant contents, doing, as I mentioned before, vaccines that can be provided or can be getted to the population through the fruits or whatever. Again, that is something that is still under development. They are not in the market, but And in the case that they arrive to the market, they will go through a very safety process. Okay, I don't know if there is any other question. Okay, I don't see any other question on the chat. Thank you so much to all of you. I hope we can have a personal talk and on the next sessions. I'm happy to go to. I would like to go to Tudela finally to have a face-to-face session. I hope this global situation allow us to do. Meanwhile, thank you so much for your attention. Be safe, and we